Hello, Dr. Frazier here. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of the most iconic Gestalt therapy interventions. Keep in mind, though, that Gestalt interventions are intended to be experiments. And these experiments are best received when they're crafted collaboratively with the client. In other words, they're sort of on-the-fly ways of testing out a different way of being, speaking, thinking, or behaving. The client and the counselor put their heads together to come up with a way of testing these things out. These experiments are conceived and carried out in the here and now based on what's at the forefront in the field for the client in the current moment. So most Gestalt interventions are, or at least they appear to the client to be, spontaneous. Okay, so one important Gestalt goal is to complete unfinished business. In Gestalt terms, what has been left unfinished in the past can be brought into the present to be brought to completion. So in other words, what's left unfinished in the background can be pulled into the figure and processed in the here and now. The most famous Gestalt technique for working with unfinished business is, of course, the empty chair technique. In this exercise, the client imagines that the person with whom they have unfinished business is invited into the counseling room. So the setup is really important here. For maximum impact, the client's invited to picture this person in detail, imagining where that person might sit, how they might sit, what they might be wearing, what their face might look like, all of it. And the client is then invited to speak directly to the empty chair in which that imagined person is sitting, expressing whatever they want or need to express. In this way, the client's able to complete the business that had previously been left incomplete. At this point, the counselor could also invite the client to switch chairs with the imagined person and then speak as that person, what the client imagines that person would want to say back to them. And then this can continue back and forth until the client feels that the conversation has reached completion. And then the counselor will process this experience with the client to discover what new awareness the client has gained and what the client desires to do with any new insight that has been gained here. So an alternative to the empty chair setup can be an expressive art setup. So the counselor invites the client to create a painting or drawing of that person with whom they have unfinished business. Alternatively, the client could select a sand tray miniature that best represents that person. And then this miniature or the completed painting or drawing is then placed in the chair opposite the client. So then rather than they're speaking directly to like an imagined person in an empty chair, the client is now speaking to their creation onto which they have sort of projected the essence of that person. If the client's to engage in the role play, then they get up and then they take the seat with the creation or the miniature and they like hold it in their lap or in their hands and they speak as the miniature or they speak as the painting or the drawing. And the client can then move back and forth between the two chairs as much as needed to move the client to completion of the unfinished business that they had left unexpressed. So then a related Gestalt intervention is role play. Rather than speaking to an empty chair, the client speaks to the counselor who's playing a role. So here's an example of a role play in the first person between Fritz Perls and Gloria. So Gloria begins by playing Fritz and then she moves to playing herself, Gloria.
I'd like to ask you a question, and because I have a feeling you don't like me right off the bat, and I want to know if you do.
Can you now play Fritz Perls not liking Gloria? What would he say?
He'd say that she's a phony, for one.
Say you are a phony.
You're a phony, and you're a flip little girl, and you're a show-off.
What would Gloria answer to that?
I know what I'd answer. I'd say I think you are too.
Now say, tell this to me. Tell me what a phony I am.
Well,
Say, Fritz, you're a fool.
Well, phony's not quite the right word, but it's more like a show-off.
A show-off.
Like you know all the answers.
Okay, so here is another role play between Fritz and Gloria. This one designed to help Gloria play around with the idea of gaining power. So Gloria plays Fritz, and then Fritz asks her if she can transfer this power to herself in some way. And at first she balks, but then she realizes in the here and now that she would like to demand more respect. But she's not yet found the courage to do so just yet.
And you're the type of person that seems like you demand so much respect, and so you're...
Please play Fritz. I demand so much respect. Play this Fritz you just saw.
Well, you know how smart I am. I know more about psychology than you do, Gloria. So anything I say, of course, is right.
Can you say the same as Gloria? Something similar as Gloria. With the same act as Gloria. I demand respect because...
I don't know.
You don't...
No, I don't. I identify it with my father, but not me. I don't feel I demand respect.
You don't demand respect.
No.
Sure not.
As a matter of fact, I'd like more. I'd like you to respect me more.
No, you see? So you demand respect.
All right, yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, if I could demand respect from you, I would.
But do it. Who's preventing you except yourself?
Okay, so another Gestalt technique is guided imagery. So this involves bringing the past or bringing the future into the present through one's imagination. So you can begin by focusing the client in the here and now. For example, maybe you use mindfulness of breath. We breathe in the here and now, right? We can't breathe in the past. We can't breathe in the future. Our breath is, like, by its very nature, a now kind of thing. And so then you can invite the client to transition into an imaginal scene. Any scene is possible, one the client has experienced, one they've read about in a book or seen in a movie, or even one that only exists within their imagination. So I use the 5 senses to make this scene as real as possible. Invite the client to tell you what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, what they're smelling, what they're tasting. Invite them to tell you what they're feeling emotionally and what they're feeling in their bodies, and walk them through the entire scene, whatever scene it is that the two of you have sort of collaboratively imagined and constructed. And then afterwards, verbally process with the client for increased hemispheric integration. So invite them to explore what awareness they gained and what they might like to do with that increased awareness and insight. And explore what choices are now available to them that they had been previously unaware of. Okay. People think that Gestalt counselors focus primarily on feelings and body sensations, but this is not so. Gestalt counselors focus on whatever is in the figure spot for the client, the foreground, and then they work to bring elements from the ground into the forefront figure for increased awareness. Often it's our emotions and our body sensations that are what go out of our awareness. They exist in the background, and that's why Gestalt counselors tend to spend time focusing on these two areas. So in order to help the client bring their feelings into the figure, begin by inviting them to locate their feeling within their own body. Okay, so feelings are always felt in the body. Clients may notice tension, heat, or cold. They might notice numbness, some kind of movement like turning in their body somewhere. But certain emotions tend to sort of hang out in specific parts of the body. So here on this slide, you see sort of a chart depicting that. Anger tends to feel hot in our upper bodies. Fear also feels hot there, but it's hottest in the heart area. Disgust creeps lower and burns colder. Happiness lights up all of us. Sadness can feel cold throughout, while depression, you see that near the bottom, middle, is even colder throughout. So notice all these feeling states in the bodies. So Gestalt counselors invite clients to locate a feeling and stay with it without having to identify the emotion leading to that feeling. They might even invite the client to try an experiment, enlarge that feeling by making it more intense. Can they intensify whatever feeling they're feeling in the body? The Gestalt counselor might invite the client to physically connect with that feeling and remain present with it, or sort of feel into it rather than avoiding it, dismissing it, ignoring it, as they typically tend to do. And again, the intent isn't to change the feeling. Instead, the intent is to invite the client to experiment with relating to their feelings differently than they have been relating. The client may gain increased understanding about the temporary nature of feelings and their intensity. So they may also gain increased understanding that they can tolerate more feelings than they originally thought that they could tolerate. Those feelings that had felt intolerable, maybe they're actually tolerable after all. Paradoxically, though, when feelings are felt rather than sort of squashed down and repressed, they do tend to resolve themselves more quickly than we might expect. The feelings like surge and then they ebb, kind of like a wave. So for a client who's gotten increasingly adept at walling off against their own emotions and disconnecting from their own bodies, it's as if their emotions and body sensations have been left in the background for far too long, and it can be helpful to move them into the field temporarily. And this can be accomplished by naming the feeling, which can be aided by a feelings wheel like on the left here. And it can also be accomplished by depicting where they feel that emotion in their bodies through labeling, using something like the template that you see here on the right. Both of these are useful and they're simple resources that kind of can be done anywhere. So Gestalt counselors spend time helping clients focused on embodied emotion. And this focus can take intentionality to achieve, especially for people who've grown increasingly rigid about shutting off their awareness. So I like this quote here. Why do we close our eyes when we pray, cry, kiss, or dream? Because the most beautiful things in life are not seen, but felt by the heart. But I want you to keep in mind, though, that for some clients, closing their eyes can feel dangerous. If clients don't want to close their eyes, that's okay. There are other ways to help them shift their attention inward and feel these things in their bodies. They can choose a place in front of them to sort of stare at, or they can just allow their gaze to go soft and unfocused. Offering choice for clients can help increase their buy-in to the experiment. Yeah, so another way to increase the client's awareness is to invite them to develop or exaggerate a movement that they're doing. Sometimes our right brains know something and are trying to communicate it without words. And when the movement is repeated over and over again, integration occurs. The client gains verbal language for what the right brain already knew. So let's watch this between Fritz and Gloria.
I have to wait till you say something that I can pick on, but
What does this mean? Can you develop this movement?
I can't find words. I want to...
Develop this, as if you were dancing.
I want to start all over again with you.
Okay, so she realized what she wanted to do after having done this movement enough times to let it sort of give her left brain a chance to have words for what her right brain was trying to say. And so that increased awareness of what she wanted came through the experiment of doing the same movement over and over again until her right brain and left brain sort of integrated and hooked up. Okay, so there are lots of great ways to help enhance a client's awareness of what has remained hidden in the background. One I've already mentioned here is connecting with the body. Interoception is a person's ability to feel what is happening inside of them and allow those body sensations to sort of cue them. And a related way to enhance awareness is what's called bottom-up work. So this involves beginning with the body rather than beginning with the mind. So here's a simple bottom-up experiment that you can try, right? First, try to sit as if you have as little power and control as possible. So curl in on yourself, tuck your chin down in, look down, make yourself as small as you possibly can be in your chair. And now just sit with this for a few moments. Breathe in, breathe out. Notice what signals this sends. What emotions do you become aware of that are emerging as you sit this way? This is like a classic shame posture. So notice what's coming up for you. Okay, and now stand up as if you have lots of power and control. Stand tall, spread your feet a little wider, raise your arms up over your head and your fists like a victory stance. Tilt your chin up slightly and look ahead and up. And just stand like this for a few moments and breathe in and out and notice what signals this sends. What emotions do you become aware are emerging as you stand this way? This is like an open, powerful stance, and feel into that. Okay, so think about the embodied difference between these two ways of being. And now imagine how this might be used to help clients. You can invite them to exaggerate both stances as much as possible, making themselves as small or as large as they possibly can be, and then ask them to notice what happens, not only to their emotional state, but also to like their breathing and their heart rate and what happens in their gut. Another great way to help enhance a client's awareness is to invite them to repeat a critical phrase over and over again. Sometimes we say something very profound, very meaningful, but we sort of just skip right over it. We bounce right past it and we keep going. If you notice that your client has done this, ask them to pause for a moment and invite them to go back and restate that phrase that you believe is really impactful. So the first time they repeat it, they'll likely say it in the same quick, blasé tone, and then ask them to repeat it again and again and again if necessary until their awareness of it has shifted. So for example, a client might be talking about their brother and they might say, yeah, he's always been jealous of me. And I might ask the client to stop right there and go back and repeat the phrase again. And they'll say, yeah, he's always been jealous of me. And then they'll say again. And so they'll say, yeah, he's always been jealous of me. And then again, he's always been jealous of me. I find that it's typically on the third or fourth repetition that the gravity of what they've said finally sinks in. And you can invite the client to notice what happens in their bodies as they sit with this phrase, as they repeat it multiple times. Now that you've really slowed things down, they're more likely to achieve a new awareness. And as you verbally process with them what's occurred for them, integration of this new awareness across hemispheres becomes more accessible. Okay, since we're talking about enhancing awareness, I wanted to take a moment to share with you about the imaginal exaggeration technique. So this is similar to that paradoxical intention intervention that we discussed earlier with Adlerian therapy. So this technique can be used to increase awareness about any emotion, but it can prove especially useful when working with sort of fear and worry. So you start by inviting the client to verbally describe their fear, and then invite them to blow this fear up and make it much, much worse in their own minds. They can imagine it as big, scary, ugly, so on. Have them use as many negative descriptive words as possible in describing the fear in the worst possible way with the most dire consequences, kind of like this. Objects in the mirror are maybe closer than they appear, this T-Rex in the rearview mirror. So paradoxically, sometimes clients find that enlarging the worry to the worst case scenario, the thing they're actually facing, doesn't seem so big or terrible anymore. But that's not only the time in which this experiment would be considered a success. So keep in mind that Gestalt counseling, we're not trying to change anything. We're simply trying to help the client increase their awareness, to move what has been in the ground into the figure spot and see what happens. Many times the client's awareness shifts and new understanding is integrated. They realize that they have more choice than they first thought that they had. Exaggerating the worst case scenario helps people confront worry in a more active way. They're no longer passive victims to their fear. They are actively engaging with it. And this shift in and of itself can be considered a victory. Okay, I want to take some time here to talk about the Gestalt approach to polarity. Polarity is the presence of two opposite tendencies. You can recognize a polarity when the client uses the word but. So for example, the client might tell you, I want to lose weight, but I can't seem to get motivated. Or I'm really unhappy, but I'm afraid to leave him. So this type of intrapersonal conflict is called ambivalence in other theories. Ambivalence is like two hands. On the one hand, this, but on the other hand, this. So I know that I should do this, but I don't want to. I need to do this, but it's really hard to find the time. So Gestalt counselors have a very specific way of working with a polarity. So first you have to acknowledge, identify, and name the polarity. Boil it down to its most basic form and just check in with the client to make sure you've distilled it down accurately. So you might say, so what you're telling me is that you want to lose weight, but you can't get motivated. Is that right? So then if they approve of your summarization, the next step is to separate and explore the two ends of the polarity, each in turn. Clients tend to want to jump back and forth, but your job is to help them choose one side, land on it, and stay there while they thoroughly explore that one side. Don't leave that side until acceptance of that side has been achieved. The truth is that both sides of the polarity contain positive aspects. If they didn't, the polarity would not exist. So stay on a single side until the client recognizes the positive aspects of that side and can accept it as a good part of themselves. Recognizing this can increase self-compassion and decrease resistance to the desired change that they're wanting to make. But how do you choose which side to focus on first? So you ask the client to explore the side that is currently in the figure at the forefront for them. In other words, you might say something like, which side of this polarity are you most aware of in this moment? The part of you that wants to lose weight or the part of you that isn't feeling motivated enough to do it? So you go with whichever part of them is already in the figure spot, in that foreground, and you explore it fully until the client has achieved acceptance, maybe even appreciation of that part. And then and only then should you invite the client to shift their awareness by allowing the accepted part to settle into the background and bringing the other part into that foreground figure spot. So I've already told you that Gestalt counselors can use expressive arts and other experiential modalities to help clients increase their awareness. Perhaps my favorite of these modalities is Sand-Tray. A polarity will often manifest itself into the client's tray. This will often make itself apparent even before the client verbally explains their tray to you. You can detect potential polarities by noticing groupings of miniatures separated by something. The separator can be a fence like the one in the photo here. It could be like a bridge, a row of trees, or rocks, or even just a line that they drew in the sand. When you're using Sand-Tray to work with a client and a polarity appears, you work with it exactly the same way that I just explained to you before. But you can invite the client to speak as each side of the polarity as you work with it. So this sort of combines two different Gestalt techniques into a single intervention. So in the case of the photo here, the client might tell you that they are most aware of the death side of their polarity right now. So you might invite them to speak as the death side. So they might say something like, I'm the death side, and I have handcuffs to keep this client trapped and bound. I have a casket for when I truly kill them all the way. I have a trash can because I want to make them feel like garbage. I can really heap on the criticism so they feel small and trapped and alone. At first, it might seem as if this side of the polarity will be impossible for the client to reach acceptance and even appreciation on. How can somebody appreciate a side of themselves, that persecutes them in this way? But when provided with the space to do this work, clients can come to recognize the helpful thing that each side of the polarity is trying to accomplish. So in this case, the client might eventually vocalize like, I, the death side, am trying to protect client from hope because it hurts too much when hope gets crushed. In the past, they let themselves hope, and that was when everything fell apart and it was too painful to bear. And I don't want them to have to go through that ever again. So the client might eventually come to appreciate how the death side of their polarity is trying to guard them from being terribly disappointed. Paradoxically, once both sides of a polarity are fully accepted, change can sometimes actually become possible. Okay, let's watch Fritz Perls help Gloria identify her polarity.
Well, because I got two feelings. I was going to say I want you to love me and hug me, but then I thought, no, I don't want to.
What's your objection?
I'd be scared to be too close to you.
Now we're getting somewhere. First you want to be close to me. Now you're afraid to be too close to me.
It is what I'm saying, but...
That's right. Now we got the two poles of your existence.
But they're two different feelings. Close, I mean emotionally, but not physically.
But we've got the two poles of your existence now. Either far away in a corner, or be so close that you can melt into one with the other person. And apparently you travel between the two extremes.
I do.
Okay, so he identified the polarity. There's a part of Gloria that wants to stay far, far away, never connect, stay in the corner. And there's another part of her that wants to get close, so close that she could almost fuse with somebody else and lose herself in the fusing. And he said, it appears you travel between these two extremes. And she thought about it. You could see the wheels turning when she realized, like, I do. That is what I do. And so this is the power of identifying a polarity. And if he were to continue to work with this polarity in a Gestalt sense, he would ask her, which part of you are you more aware of right now? The part of you that wants to sit far away from me in a corner and hide, or the part of you that wants to get so close to me that you could almost lose yourself in relating to me? Whichever part is she's most aware of right now, that's where you would spend time focusing in on. And you wouldn't leave that part, even if she wants to flip back to the other one. You bring her focus back, and you wouldn't leave that one part until she has reached a place of sort of acceptance of that part, and maybe even appreciation of the good thing that that part is trying to do. And then and only then can you switch and go to the other part and do the same process with it until they have reached a place of acceptance and maybe even appreciation for that part of them, and the polarity will then be resolved. Okay, so Gloria's polarity kept her from making and maintaining contact with others. And this disrupted contact is going to play itself out in multiple life arenas. If she can resolve this polarity, many of her struggles will also resolve. But for now, at least, she has an increased awareness of these two parts of herself, the part that longs to be close to others and the part that resists closeness because it feels too vulnerable and too risky. So in Gloria, this manifests in authenticity, what Fritz Perls calls being phony. It manifests in a juvenile game, like playing, like hiding in a metaphorical corner and rigidly embodying this poor, pitiful little girl victim role rather than meeting others as her true self. And so hopefully this example ties together several of these basic Gestalt concepts, increasing awareness, making contact, field theory. So as I asserted earlier, these are only a few examples of Gestalt interventions. Anything that is ethical can be used as an experiment, crafted in the here and now to help a client increase and enhance their awareness about something. And often these are not big fancy interventions like empty chair. These are simple, obvious ways to bring something into that figure spot in the foreground that has been residing unnoticed in the background, and see what happens. Gestalt is a very sort of open-ended way of working. We're not trying to herd a client into a specific outcome. We're simply trying to help the client try out different ways to increase awareness and to reach greater choice. I hope this presentation has been helpful to you, and I really appreciate your attention, so thank you for it.